It was late afternoon when my sister, Clara, called me. Her voice, usually vibrant and teasing, carried a different tone this time, urgent, a little shaky. "Hey, Liam," she began, "I need your help." I paused mid-step in my kitchen, my coffee mug warming my palm. Clara rarely asked for help, preferring to solve her problems with sheer determination and the occasional hint of stubbornness. "What's going on?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She let out a sigh that buzzed with nerves. "I need to move out of my apartment, like, yesterday. It's not safe anymore. My landlord's raising the rent, and I just can't handle it." I frowned. Clara was a master of self-sufficiency. Asking for help, let alone for money, was uncharacteristic. But her words pulled at my instincts to protect. She was my younger sister, after all. "Where are you thinking of moving?" I asked cautiously. "There's this house across town I found online," she explained. "It's perfect, close to work, quiet neighborhood, and the rent is reasonable. But I need a deposit up front, and I don't have enough right now." Her voice wavered. "Could you loan me $2,000? I swear I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I hesitated, running my fingers over the rim of the mug. Clara had never been one to borrow money. If she was asking, she must really need it. "Of course," I said. "Just send me the details, and I'll transfer the money tonight." The relief in her voice was immediate, and she thanked me profusely before hanging up. I stood there for a moment, staring out the window. Something about the conversation didn't sit right, but I brushed it off. She was my sister, what reason would she have to lie? Little did I know, the truth was far more complicated than I could imagine. The next day, Clara sent me a text with a simple message: "Thank you for everything, Liam. I'll make this right soon." Attached was a screenshot of her bank details. I transferred the $2,000 without a second thought. Helping her felt right, even if her situation seemed a little off. A few days passed, and I didn't hear much from Clara. Normally, she'd call or text me regularly, updates about work, rants about her favorite shows, random memes. But now, there was radio silence. It wasn't like her. On Friday, I stopped by her place unannounced, carrying some groceries. Her apartment complex was a familiar mess of peeling paint and noisy neighbors. When I knocked on the door, it took longer than usual for her to answer. When she finally opened it, she looked off. Her hair was hastily pulled back, and she had dark circles under her eyes. A suitcase sat near the door, half-packed. "Liam," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on you," I replied, holding up the grocery bags. "And I thought you could use these while you're in transition." She shifted uncomfortably, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was more cluttered than usual, clothes and papers strewn across the furniture. Her laptop sat open on the dining table, a video paused mid-play. I caught a glimpse of sunny beaches and clear blue water. "Planning your next trip?" I asked casually, nodding toward the screen. Her eyes darted to the laptop, and she quickly closed it. "Oh, no. Just daydreaming," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I mean, who doesn't want to be on a beach somewhere, right?" I chuckled but felt a twinge of suspicion. Something about her demeanor wasn't adding up. "How's the house hunt going?" I asked, setting the groceries on the counter. Clara hesitated, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweater. "Good. It's going good. I'm finalizing everything tomorrow." Her words were rushed, almost rehearsed. As much as I wanted to believe her, my gut told me there was more to the story. But I let it slide, for now. I didn't want to press her and risk pushing her away. Still, as I left her apartment, unease followed me. I resolved to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, she was my sister. She'd never lie to me, would she? A week later, I found myself back at Clara's apartment. She'd been avoiding my calls again, and I told myself it was because she was busy with the move. But deep down, I was starting to worry. I wanted to see how she was doing, and maybe get some answers about her strange behavior. When I arrived, her door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. At first, I thought she was talking to her landlord or maybe a friend helping her pack. But as I approached, the words grew clearer, and I stopped in my tracks. "And Liam just handed me the money," Clara was saying. Her tone was casual, light-hearted, almost amused. "Seriously?" another voice chimed in, one I didn't recognize. "You didn't even have to give him a sob story about being sick or anything?" "Nope," Clara replied with a laugh. "Just told him I needed a new place, and he didn't ask a single question." There was a pause, followed by the sound of rustling papers and the scrape of a chair. "So, Hawaii's happening for sure now, right? You and Josh are booked?" "Yup," Clara said, her voice brimming with excitement. "We're leaving next week. I can't wait, sun, sand, and no more of this apartment." My stomach dropped. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Hawaii. Josh. This wasn't about a new house or escaping a bad situation. She'd lied to me, used me, to fund a vacation with her boyfriend. I stood there frozen, a storm of emotions raging inside me, anger, hurt, betrayal. I wanted to burst in and confront her, demand to know why she'd lied to me, why she thought it was okay to manipulate me like this. But instead, I turned and walked away. By the time I got home, my emotions were a tangled mess. Every moment replayed in my head, her urgent tone when she asked for money, her evasive answers when I visited, and now the casual way she'd laughed about it behind my back. Clara, my sister, the person I'd always trusted, had betrayed me. And for what? A trip to Hawaii with her boyfriend? I paced the living room, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. Part of me wanted to call her right then and there, let her know exactly how I felt. But a quieter voice in my head told me to think it through. If I went into this conversation fueled by pure anger, it wouldn't go well. So, I sat down and began to plan. I needed her to understand just how much her actions hurt me, not just the financial betrayal, but the damage to our relationship. The next evening, I showed up at her apartment unannounced. This time, I knocked hard, giving her no room to pretend she wasn't home. She opened the door, her face lighting up in surprise. "Liam. What's going on? Can I come in?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Sure," she said, stepping aside. Her apartment looked even more chaotic than before, suitcases now fully packed and stacked by the door. I walked in, glancing around. The laptop was open on the coffee table, a web page still loaded with pictures of resorts. It was like she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Clara," I began, turning to face her, "I need to ask you something. And I want you to be honest with me." Her expression faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Okay, what's up? Are you really moving into a new house?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. Her eyes widened just a fraction before she quickly masked it. "Of course. Why would you even ask that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "Because I came by the other day. I overheard you talking to someone." Clara froze, the color draining from her face. "You said the money I gave you was for a trip to Hawaii," I continued. "You even laughed about how easily I handed it over." "Liam, she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't lie to me again. Just tell me the truth." She swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. "Okay," she admitted softly. "I wasn't completely honest with you." I crossed my arms, waiting for her to continue. "The thing is," she began, fidgeting with her hands. "Josh and I have been talking about taking a trip for months, but I didn't have the money. And when I realized how much I needed it, I panicked. I didn't know how else to ask you. I thought if I told you it was for rent, you'd you'd help me without questioning it. Her words only deepened the pit in my stomach. So, you lied, I said, my voice tight. You used me. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. I didn't mean to. Yes, it was, I interrupted. You didn't mean to what, Clara? Hurt me? Make me feel like an idiot for trusting you? Because that's exactly what you did. She looked down, guilt etched across her face. I didn't think it would matter, she whispered. Didn't matter? I repeated, incredulous. Clara, I gave you that money because I thought you were in trouble. I worried about you. I would have done anything to help you, because you're my sister. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let up. And now I find out it's all for some vacation. How could you think that's okay? Do you have any idea how much you've damaged my trust in you? I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Sorry isn't enough, Clara. You didn't just take my money. You broke something between us. How am I supposed to believe you next time you ask for help? She wiped at her eyes, sniffling. I'll pay you back. Every cent. I promise. It's not just about the money, I said, my voice softening slightly. It's about what you did. How easily you lied to me. Do you even understand how hard it's going to be for me to trust you again? She nodded, her shoulders slumping. I get it, she said quietly. I screwed up. Big time. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. I'll cancel the trip, I'll pay you back, she trailed off, her voice breaking. I wanted to believe her, but part of me couldn't let go of the betrayal just yet. You've got a lot to prove, Clara, I said finally. And it's going to take time. We stood there in heavy silence for a moment before I turned to leave. As I walked out the door, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what had been lost, not just the money, but the bond we once shared. The drive home from Clara's apartment felt endless. My mind was spinning, replaying her words, her tone, and the laughter she shared with her friend. I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, casually dismissing the trust I'd placed in her. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about how easily she had lied to me, how effortlessly she'd taken advantage of the bond we shared. When I got home, I dropped my keys on the counter and slumped onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. A dull ache settled in my chest as I replayed every moment leading up to this. Her desperate plea for help, her quiet demeanor when I visited, the excuses, the rushed explanations, it all added up now. Over the next few days, Clara tried to reach out. I ignored her calls and let her messages pile up. They started with simple apologies, short and unsure, but quickly became more desperate. The texts didn't help. If anything, they fueled my anger. How could she expect me to believe anything she said now? Her casual betrayal had shattered my ability to trust her. Despite everything, I found myself pacing the house, torn between anger and something else I couldn't quite name. Was it sadness? Disappointment? I didn't want to confront her while my emotions were raw, but staying silent wasn't making things any better. That evening, as the sky turned a dull orange, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Clara, it was Josh. Seeing his name flash on the screen sent a fresh wave of irritation through me. I answered reluctantly, unsure of what to expect. His tone was cautious, almost pleading. He explained that he had only recently learned where the money came from and that he had nothing to do with Clara's lie. He also mentioned that Clara had cancelled the trip and had been feeling deeply ashamed about what happened. The conversation left me with more questions than answers. If what he said was true, Clara had already taken steps to make amends. But was that enough? Could she really undo the hurt she'd caused? After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, wrestling with my emotions. I wanted to believe that my sister was genuinely sorry, that she was trying to fix things. But the memory of her betrayal still felt too fresh, too sharp. As I stared at the dim glow of my phone, I realized there was only one way forward. If we were ever going to repair our relationship, I needed to confront her again, not with anger, but with honesty. I had to let her know how deeply her actions had hurt me and see if she was truly ready to make things right. A week after our confrontation, Clara showed up at my doorstep unannounced. It was late in the afternoon, and the setting sun cast a golden glow over the front porch. She looked hesitant, clutching a brown envelope in her hands and shifting her weight nervously from one foot to the other. I opened the door and stood silently, waiting for her to speak. She hesitated for a moment before holding out the envelope. Her voice was soft but steady as she explained that it contained a partial repayment of the money she owed me. She had been selling her belongings, clothes, furniture, even some jewelry, to start paying me back. I took the envelope and glanced inside. It wasn't the full amount, but it was more than I'd expected. Several $100s in cash sat neatly stacked, a tangible representation of her effort. Clara explained that she'd cancelled the Hawaii trip and had been working extra shifts at her job to make things right. As she spoke, her words were filled with remorse. She admitted that she had acted selfishly and recklessly and said she hated the pain she'd caused me. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just listened. It was clear she had rehearsed what to say, but there was a vulnerability in her voice that felt genuine. I finally broke the silence, telling her how much her betrayal had hurt, not just because of the money, but because of the trust she had shattered. I reminded her that our relationship had always been built on honesty, and her actions had made me question everything I thought I knew about her. Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She promised to do whatever it took to rebuild that trust, no matter how long it took. As she left, I sat down with the envelope still in my hand. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but I couldn't deny that she was trying. It was a small step, a fragile, uncertain one, but it was something. For the first time since overhearing her conversation, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Weeks passed after Clara's visit, and though things weren't completely mended, there was a shift. Her consistent updates and genuine effort to repay the money started to chip away at the resentment I'd been holding onto. Still, I couldn't fully shake the memory of her betrayal. Every message or phone call from her stirred a mixture of hope and caution. One afternoon, Clara reached out and asked if we could meet for lunch. She said she wanted to talk openly, no apologies, no rehearsed speeches, just an honest conversation. It caught me off guard. Clara wasn't one to confront emotional issues head-on, but I agreed. If she was willing to try, then I could at least listen. We met at a small cafe on the quieter side of town. When I arrived, she was already seated, fidgeting with the corner of a napkin. She looked up as I approached, her face a mixture of nervousness and resolve. As we settled in, Clara wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. She admitted how deeply she regretted what she had done, but this time, her explanation went beyond just saying, "I'm sorry." She spoke about the feelings that had driven her actions, stress, frustration, and a misguided sense of entitlement. She described how her relationship with Josh had made her feel like she was falling behind. He was always talking about extravagant plans and living as if money was no object. When the Hawaii trip came up, she'd felt trapped between disappointing him and finding a way to make it happen. Her voice broke as she talked about the guilt she'd carried after lying to me. She said it wasn't until she heard the anger and hurt in my voice during our confrontation that she realized the full weight of what she had done. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad. She slid it across the table toward me. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a detailed plan, how much she still owed, when she planned to pay it back, and the steps she was taking to improve her financial situation. It even included a section about rebuilding trust, with specific actions like being transparent about her plans, scheduling regular check-ins, and not asking for help unless it was truly necessary. I sat quietly, reading through it. It was meticulous, almost overcompensating in its detail. But it wasn't just the effort that struck me, it was the fact that she was holding herself accountable without me having to demand it. Clara watched me nervously, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I could tell she was bracing herself for my reaction. I finally looked up and told her that while I appreciated her effort, trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. I explained that her actions had left a mark, and it would take time to fully believe in her again. She nodded, a small flicker of relief crossing her face. She said she understood and promised to be patient, no matter how long it took. As we finished lunch, the tension between us felt a little lighter. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the sister I had always known, the one who could make mistakes but cared enough to own up to them. The road ahead still seemed long, but for the first time since this all began, it didn't feel impossible. One weekend, about a month after our lunch, Clara showed up at my house unannounced. I wasn't expecting company, so when I opened the door to see her standing there, I was caught off guard. She held a small box in her hands, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "I wanted to drop this off," she said simply, handing me the box. I invited her in, though I was wary about what this visit might entail. Clara placed the box on the kitchen counter and gestured for me to open it. Inside were a few carefully chosen items, an old watch that had belonged to our dad, a handful of photos from when we were kids, and a handwritten note on crisp stationery. I picked up the watch, the cool metal pressing against my palm. It had been years since I'd seen it, and the sight of it brought a wave of nostalgia. Clara explained that she'd found it while going through some of her belongings and thought I should have it. The photos were equally meaningful, snapshots of us as children, grinning with reckless abandon at birthday parties or family barbecues. Seeing them reminded me of a time when our relationship had been simpler, untouched by adult complications. Finally, I unfolded the note. Her handwriting was neat but hesitant, like she'd rewritten parts of it over and over. She expressed how deeply she regretted hurting me and how much she valued the bond we'd shared. She wrote about how she had taken that bond for granted and how her betrayal had shown her just how fragile trust could be. "I know this doesn't fix anything," she said, her voice soft. "But I want you to know that I'm serious about making things right. Not just with the money, but with us." I set the note down, feeling a tightness in my chest. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. It wasn't about grand apologies or dramatic changes. It was about showing me that she was willing to put in the effort to rebuild what had been broken. For the first time in weeks, I felt my defenses eased just a little. I thanked her for the box and told her I appreciated the thoughtfulness. She seemed relieved, though the tension in her shoulders didn't entirely fade. As she left, I stood at the door and watched her go. The road to forgiveness was still long, but for the first time, I believed we might actually get there. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, going through the contents of the box again. The photos, the watch, the note, they felt like tiny bridges, slowly closing the gap that had grown between us. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Several weeks passed after Clara's gesture, and though our interactions were still careful, they had started to feel more natural. The bitterness that had clouded our conversations was softening, replaced by cautious honesty. She continued to repay the money bit by bit, often with updates about how she was managing her finances. Each payment was accompanied by a note or a call, not just to acknowledge the debt but to check in and talk about how she was working to rebuild her life. One Friday evening, she called and asked if I would meet her for coffee. I was hesitant but agreed, curious about what she had to say. We met at a small cafe downtown, one I didn't frequent but where the atmosphere felt calm and neutral. Clara was already there when I arrived, a warm drink in front of her and a folder sitting on the table. She greeted me with a smile that was both hopeful and tentative. We made small talk for a few minutes, easing into the conversation. Then she pushed the folder toward me, her expression serious. Inside was a collection of documents, her monthly budget, a list of expenses, and a clear repayment plan for the remaining balance. It was meticulously detailed, showing not only how she planned to pay me back in full but how she was making changes to ensure she never found herself in a similar position again. "I wanted you to see this," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Not just to prove I'm serious about the money, but to show you I'm learning from this. I don't want to be the person who takes shortcuts anymore." As I looked through the pages, I saw the effort and thought she had put into them. It wasn't flashy or exaggerated, it was realistic, humble, and actionable. It was clear she wasn't just trying to repay a debt but to rebuild her character. We spent the next hour talking about everything: her struggles, the pressure she had felt to maintain a certain image, and the guilt she'd carried since our confrontation. She admitted how hard it had been to face her mistakes and how much she had feared losing my trust forever. In turn, I shared my own feelings. I told her how deeply her betrayal had hurt me, how it had shaken my perception of her, and how hard it had been to let go of the resentment. But I also told her that I had started to see her differently, not as the sister who let me down, but as someone who was trying to change and grow. By the time we left the cafe, the tension between us had eased significantly. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page, not as adversaries but as siblings working to rebuild what had been broken. That weekend, Clara surprised me again. She asked if she could come over to help with some repairs I'd been putting off around the house. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt genuine. She spent the day patching up drywall and repainting a section of the living room while we talked and joked like we used to. As the day wound down, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Clara turned to me, her expression serious yet hopeful. She thanked me for giving her the chance to make things right and promised she wouldn't take it for granted. It was in that quiet moment, surrounded by fading light and the chirping of distant crickets, that I realized something important: forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a process, a journey made up of small decisions to let go of anger and replace it with understanding. Clara and I weren't back to where we had been before the betrayal, but we were moving towards something just as strong, maybe even stronger.